No other gods. Number 2, no graven images. Oh, you're a lot better. The visual aids are working good. Number 3, no taking the Lord's name in vain. Number 4, Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Number 5, honor thy father and thy mother. Number 6, no killing. And number 7, no adultery. And this morning we are now looking at no stealing. No stealing. This is the third and the last of the 3 of the shortest commandments, right? The no killing, no adultery, no stealing. And to be honest, these 3 commandments were the ones I was most worried about when I was first planning out this series and I decided to do only one word a week. I mean, how can you talk for 15 to 20 minutes about no stealing, right? There's only so much you can say. These short commandments seem so straightforward. We should have all gone home 20 minutes ago. But that's only until you start breaking it open and really looking at what these words have to say to us. And it's true that these 3 short commandments actually did end up being the most difficult for me, but not for the reasons that I thought. I was worried that I wouldn't have enough to say, but instead of struggling to fill the space, I soon realized that there was just too much to say. That any one of these commandments could easily fill their own multi-week series. But 15 minutes, I guarantee you. But they could easily expand beyond that because the nature of these 3 short commandments is that they invite us into further conversation and ongoing interpretation. If you listen almost every week during the prayer of dedication over our offering, I thank God for the invitation that God gives us to join the ongoing work of peace and love and justice. This week I was reminded that it's worth noting that this invitation that God extends to us isn't just limited to what we're able to give out of our bank accounts. God also invites us to contribute what we can to this ongoing conversation about what it means to be people of faith in the world today. This invitation encompasses all of these commandments, but these 3 short ones in particular, because their simplicity invites us to work out what they mean for us in our time today. What it means to be people of faith. These holy words are God's invitation to us to work together to create a world that allows all of God's people to live into the fullness of life that God desires for us. That's why so much of the rest of the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy is an expansion of these 3 commandments. The law that unfolds from these short words is basically a list of all the different scenarios in which these commandments can be violated and the accompanying punishments for those crimes. Because contained within each one of these divine utterances is an invitation to join a multitude of ongoing conversations on how we can best live in the world and pursue the fullness of life that God desires for us. For example, in addition to the conversation that we're having about gun violence as part of our summer book study, which you're all invited to still come to on Thursday nights, embedded within that 6th commandment of no killing are also conversations about health care, suicide, the death penalty, end-of-life care. The list could go on. These conversations are all contained within this commandment of no killing. They're given to us to figure out what to do with them. And that is only if we limit the meaning of taking life to issues that directly affect human life. There's even more conversations to have if we expand the discussion to include all the ways that we indirectly take life or shorten life through our treatment of the earth and our fellow creatures. It's an ongoing conversation that we are invited to be part of. And the same goes for the commandment that we looked at last week, the seventh commandment against adultery. Considering what no adultery means challenges us to explore our understanding of things like sexuality, faithfulness, honor, power, pleasure. And this commandment asks us to construct a sexual ethic that honors the Holy One who set us free. These simple words soon become really interesting and complicated as we break them open and let them break us open. They are a lot to take in and to live out, and that's why these conversations are ongoing. They are ever expanding and deepening our understanding of what it means to be people of faith. And at least for myself, that is one of the reasons that I keep coming back to this place week after week. Because being part of a community and a congregation that is engaged in these conversations is vitally important. Even when we don't always agree, as I wrote about in the weekly email this week, even when we don't agree, being part of the conversation is vitally important to discerning God's call for us and becoming the people that God is calling us to be. So here we are, in week 8 of this ongoing conversation, and we're given the commandment, no stealing. And because by now, after 7 weeks of looking at these holy words, we know a good starting place is to acknowledge how we have understood this word in the past. Now, I don't know about you, but I always thought and I always learned and heard this commandment in terms of robbing. Right? That as long as you didn't rob a bank or embezzle funds from the offering plate or the company account or shoplift or snatch some lady's purse, and you were fine. As long as you didn't rob or steal, you were good. But as we have seen with the other commandments, it is more complicated than that. Like the other utterances, this word isn't just about an individual's good or bad behavior. These words were given by God to all y'all. As someone a couple weeks ago reminded me, is actually the proper version, plural version of y'all. All y'all. This is for all y'all. These words were given to a people that were newly set free, who gathered in one place to hear and learn how they were to live and exist as a community, together, as a community, as free people. Because their very survival and their success depended on the strength of their communal bonds and their relationships to one another. And like the previous 2 commandments, this 8th word is about not violating a social bond that holds us together as a community, that holds us in community. So it's important for us to begin by understanding what's at stake in this commandment. What social bond is being violated or broken or threatened by stealing? Now, first thing we have to understand is that an injunction against stealing implies that there is a thing that can be stolen, right? Do we agree with this? There is a thing that can be stolen. Now, this commandment doesn't specify what thing or things shouldn't be stolen, just that there is something that can be taken away. And the second point is that if a thing can be stolen, then it must belong to someone and not to someone else. All right? These are the 2 kind of principles that this commandment is based on. So stealing is a violation of someone's right to have or possess a thing. This is the right that is being violated. And here is where the commandment breaks open in a number of ways. Because we can talk about the various things that can be stolen, or we can talk about what it means to have the right to possess these things. We can talk about the tangible things we have, like cars and houses and all the things inside those houses. But then we can also talk about the intangible things that are ours, like the inherent and inalienable rights set out by the writers of the Declaration of Independence, which are what? What are our rights? Very good. Gold civic star for you. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are things that we have that can be taken away. There's our sense of security, our ambitions, our desires for a safe and stable future for ourselves and our loved ones. These are things that we have, or that we hope to have. And then we can talk about how and why some folks have more than others, while some people live in more financially precarious situations than others. Some of the very same folks that Rose was talking about earlier that are helped through this Leaf Fund. This commandment invites us to talk about what it's like to struggle within an economic system that's designed to help the rich get richer while others struggle to secure the bare minimum of survival. Now, I found this interesting, and I hope you do as well. Interesting and enlightening. A recent report came out just a few days ago from the Economic Policy Institute, which is a nonprofit, a nonpartisan think tank that was created back in the mid-'80s. And this report shows that compensation for the CEOs of the top 350 public firms in the U.S. increased, are you ready for this? Since 1978, compensation of CEOs increased. Does anyone want to guess how much percent? Anyone want to guess? 1,000%. In 40 years, CEO compensation has increased 1,000%. And in that same time period, does anyone want to venture a guess how much the compensation for the average worker went up? It did not go down, thankfully. In 40 years, it did not go down. 12%. 1,000%. 12%. In 1960, and this report goes on, in 1965, the average CEO made about 20 times the typical worker. In 1989, that number jumped to 58 times higher as stock options became a greater part of these compensation packages. And now with these packages including large amounts of stock options, an average CEO's compensation is 250 times higher than that of a typical worker. 20 times higher in 1965 to 250 times higher today. Now, for those of you who don't know, this element of stock options is what has made the difference. It has shifted the rules of the game over the past several decades, away from a communal sense of responsibility to an almost pure and sole focus on the bottom line, as making as much money as possible for shareholders. No longer is there a sense of obligation to consumers or the communities that are being served, no longer a sense of responsibility to workers that are employed. The only concern is growing that bottom line for those at the top, while the struggle for all those average workers has only gotten worse. So, how do we interpret this word to do not steal in this economic climate? There are countless stories of individuals and families forced to make difficult decisions as they struggle to make ends meet. I asked Rose to come this morning weeks ago, even before I knew it was going to coincide with this 8th word. She could tell you the stories of these people as they struggle to make payments. One story that I heard, I don't know if it was Rose or someone else at WYFS, but they know certain funds can help towards utility bills, so they use those funds so the families can free up money to pay for school supplies or other things. There's this constant calculation of shifting money around to make ends meet. Decisions about what bills to pay and which bills to put off, decisions about whether to buy food or medicine. It is heartbreaking. And the truth is that it costs a lot to be poor these days. If you don't have enough money in your bank account, the bank charges you. If you can't make your payment, not only do you have to make the payment, you have to make a late fee. Your hours get cut. Your work schedule changes. The kids get sick or the babysitter cancels. The car breaks down. People are hanging on by a thread. And suddenly, through no fault of their own, they find themselves falling further and further behind. No matter how much money we pour into something like the LEAF project, and thank goodness it is there and work is being done to help fill these gaps and these cracks for individuals and families who just need a steadying hand to get back on their feet. But supporting programs like these is only one piece of the puzzle, only one part of the conversation that we should be having. Because part of the larger conversation about what it means to not steal is understanding that systems that stack the deck against those on the bottom and robs them of their tangible as well as intangible things that they have the right to possess. This is part of the larger conversation that we should be having. While the rich continue to get richer and the poor are in an ever increasingly precarious situation, those of us in this shrinking middle class are made to fear those hanging on to the bottom most rungs rather than questioning and changing and challenging the system altogether. This power structure that has led to such economic disparity to begin with. And in our gospel reading, we saw and we heard how Jesus didn't have much patience for those who made money charging exorbitant fees to change money. For folks who had made their way to Jerusalem, had come from every corner and part of the empire just to make their sacrifice in the temple, come to this place where they could have access to God and yet were denied. Jesus had a harsh word for those who had no regard for their fellow laborers and profited off their disregard for the common good. So for this week, to represent this ongoing conversation about what it means to not steal, our visual reminder is for those in the back, this is a piggy bank. The international symbol of saving for the future, putting something away. This symbol that reminds us that as we save for ourselves, as we seek to be good stewards of everything that has been entrusted into our care, because God has given us everything that we have, may we not forget to care for our brothers and our sisters. May we realize that everything we have has been given to us, and we are called to hold it lightly. So, beloved of God, may we work to overturn these tables, to disrupt the economic and social systems and structures that rob our brothers and our sisters of the potential to live into the fullness of life that God desires for all of us. May it be so. May God find us faithful.